Never did I think that having a steamy session with a nuclear physics-loving dominatrix would get me to such an emotionally fulfilled and enlightened state. Plus, I'm a new mom! See? This is little Cece, the cutest little hypoallergenic golden doodle ever. Aw, you're filling the hole in my heart that losing custody gave me, aren't you? You're the little baby that will distract me from my messy divorce. Aw, you're the only thing keeping me sane during this trying time. Yes, you're keeping mommy sane. You're giving me a reason to wake up in the morning, otherwise I would just be sad and depressed and in bed all day. Yes. Oh, who's my angel? There are a lot of choices for perfect little angels like Cece on the market. As a middle-aged, recently divorced, health-conscious woman living through a pandemic, I have to make the best choices for my family, puppy included. So I've decided that for our health, we're moving all natural. Goodbye chemical-filled vaccines, hello healing crystals and raw diets.
Sharon, girl, do we really have to have another conversation about your misguided beliefs that will end up doing more harm than good to both you and your adorable little puppy?
Do I know you?
Did you really forget our time together so quickly?
Oh my stars! Astra, is that you? I hardly recognized you in casual wear. Are you okay?
Yes, it's me, Astra. COVID has done a number on me, and I've decided this is my new look. We're gonna have a chat again, this time about the pandemic and vaccine development. There are lives actively on the line now. So take a seat with Cece, and let's give you the facts about vaccines in the United States.
Only if you say it like you normally do.
You're going to sit down and watch the video like a good little girl, or I'll do unspeakable things to you.
Yes, ma'am.
Today, we're going into the science of vaccines, what the CDC, WHO, and FDA have to tell us about how modern disease prevention works, and how the rise of anti-vax ideology has put our society at an increased risk of infectious disease. Welcome to Bad Astra.
First, let's put out a bit of a disclaimer at the start. We're physicists, so all of our information is coming from experts in the field, which include the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the World Health Organization, and Food and Drug Administration here in the United States. The anti-vax movement is also very strong in the United States, so that's why we're focused on the US. And also our team is US-based, if you couldn't tell by our accents and the US-centric framing in other videos. Plus, more than 500,000 people have died here at the time of recording due to COVID. So vaccines are really important to us right now. People's lives are on the line, Sharon. Also, please be nice in the comments. A lot of anti-vax sentiments are connected to a long history of racism, homophobia, transphobia, and misogyny in the medical field. Like super unethical experimentation kinds of discrimination. Disrespectful comments like ones using slurs or spouting pure hate will be deleted. However, comments are good for engagement, so we're not telling you not to get into lengthy, heated debates in our comment section. Just don't be a jerk. Now that the disclaimers are out of the way, let's talk about vaccines and how they work. A vaccine works sort of like a self-defense class for your body, training your body to fight a disease without using the strongest version of it. Generally, your body is injected with a weakened, dead, or otherwise non-threatening version of the germ. Your body's immune system fights off the non-threatening version and remembers how to fight off the disease when it really attacks. COVID-19 is a new or novel disease. This means that we didn't have the blueprints of how this virus works like we do with measles or any other disease we have a vaccine for. And COVID-19 is way worse than the flu. But modern science was able to map the virus's genome in a matter of months and develop a vaccine in record time. COVID-19 hasn't won this game of Plague Inc. yet, but we haven't won either. So if COVID-19 is more dangerous than the flu, wouldn't that make the vaccine more dangerous since we're injecting it into our bodies? Good news. The COVID-19 vaccine take the non-threatening a step further. Pfizer and Moderna are both manufacturing what are called mRNA vaccines. This means that the vaccine gives your cells a wanted dead poster of COVID-19 and instructions on how to fight it, so it can study up before it needs to fight it off instead of injecting a weakened or dead version of the disease. Let's talk details of how it does this. Apologies to Ms. Watson, Mr. Field, and Mr. Hilvert, my middle and high school biology teachers. I did have to look this up because despite your best efforts, I didn't retain much of the squishy physics. Except that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. You, a human, a carbon-based life form, are made up of cells, just like every other living organism on this dying planet. Your cells know how to make you because they have a blueprint and detailed instructions. These instructions are your DNA. In order to delegate the instructions to the correct part of the cells, there's messenger RNA, or mRNA. The DNA is the instructions from corporate. The mRNA is the email the boss nucleus sends to everybody, copied and pasted from the big long DNA instructions. The mRNA gets sent out to the cytoplasm, where an organelle called the ribosome reads the base sequence, or the instructions, and translates each 3-base triplet, or codon, into its corresponding amino acid. The ribosome, an underpaid, apathetic, disposable employee, reads the mRNA, recognizes that this is just telling them to do the one thing they do every day, does it, and then deletes the mRNA that told them to do their job. They don't care if it came from the nucleus or some other management part of the cell. They're just here for the paycheck until their YouTube channel takes off. They do what they're told and delete the email afterwards. COVID-19 vaccines inject your body with mRNA, those emails to your ribosomes, to fight off the disease. The ribosomes don't care who the instructions are coming from as long as it's mRNA. COVID vaccines are instructions for the spike protein displayed on the virus's surface. The cells read the mRNA, make the spike protein, and display it on their surface. And the mRNA is broken down by the cell like any other set of instructions. Now, the spike protein is completely harmless to your body, but it looks like the virus. It's like if the ribosome got instructions to make a giant scary spider decoration for Halloween. Now, this is a really good giant spider. Like, it's horrifying and realistic and probably something you see in Australia levels of scary. But because it isn't a real giant scary spider, it's absolutely harmless. However, your immune system, building security, turns the corner in the office and sees a giant scary spider in front of a completely calm ribosome, which is not something they expected since the ribosome normally only has amino acids in its workspace. So, the immune system freaks out and starts producing antibodies that will kill the giant spider. Antibodies are Y-shaped proteins which bind to specific proteins, like the spike protein on the giant COVID spider. Antibodies also bind to other compounds which kill the antigen. Your immune system destroys the giant fake spider like it's a real one, about to jump up and rip your face off at any moment. It takes a spiked bat to the thing like it's a printer in office space. Meanwhile, the ribosome is very confused as to why the immune system destroyed the gorgeous, detailed spider replica that the mRNA told them to make, especially since it looked like it came from the nucleus. Turns out it was just a very clever phishing email from the vaccine that looked like legit instructions from the nucleus, but since the mRNA got deleted after the big scary spider decoration was made, internal investigations will never find out who sent the phishing RMA, or if it was really from the nucleus that decided it's spooky season and wanted a giant spider decoration in the office. As a result of this horrifying experience for the immune system, all giant spiders have been banned from your body, real or not, and your immune system has a ton of antibodies, ready should they ever turn the corner and see a spider-looking thing ever again. There's a wanted poster on every door, cubicle, bathroom, and entrance to your body of the scary spider that needs to be killed on sight. When your body fights a disease or is vaccinated, it goes through this process again and puts up these posters of every threat around your body. The flu is a scary clown. Polio is those twins from The Shining, and smallpox is a bloodied Oscar the Grouch after getting into an ice skating accident in the 1978 Sesame Street Christmas special. Wow! Eris has really specific childhood trauma. Luckily, Bloody Oscar is only a memory. In 1796, Edward Jenner developed the first successful vaccine, using cowpox against smallpox, the most devastating disease known to humanity. In 1967, the World Health Organization launched an intense campaign to eradicate smallpox forever, and declared the disease vanquished forever in 1980, 3 years after the last known natural case in Somalia. Smallpox had a 30% fatality rate, and is estimated to have killed 500 million people just in its last century of existence. Thanks, vaccines! Remember learning about President FDR's polio back in history class, my fellow US inhabitants? There were pictures of him in wheelchairs due to the crippling physical disability that eventually led to his death, along with 2 to 10% of those infected. We've completely gotten rid of those twins in the United States, along with several other countries since 1979. Thanks, vaccines! Let's go through a list of things most children don't have to go through anymore thanks to vaccines. Smallpox and polio, mentioned before. Measles, high fever, rash, sometimes pneumonia and death, and rarely swelling of the brain, which leads to hearing loss and/or mental disabilities. Mumps, fever, headache, swollen salivary glands under the ears, and can cause inflammation of the testicles, ovaries, pancreas, brain, and/or tissue covering the brain and spinal cord, aka meningitis, and deafness. Rubella, rash, pink eye, birth defects if a pregnant woman is infected. Tetanus, painful muscle spasms, lockjaw, seizures, fever, difficulty breathing, pneumonia. Pertussis, whooping cough, vomiting, exhaustion, pneumonia, convulsions, slowed or stopped breathing, and brain disease. Diphtheria, which can create a gray membrane of dead cells blocking a child's windpipe and was nicknamed the strangling angel because of how quickly it killed children, and can also damage the heart, cause paralysis, and kidney failure. Haemophilus influenza type B, which can cause meningitis, pneumonia, and sepsis, and lead to hearing loss, mental disabilities, and physical disabilities. Rotavirus, which used to cause 40% of severe infant diarrhea cases and death by dehydration, among others, are no longer terrors of childhood. Thanks, people who vaccinate their children. If that list of horrifying diseases isn't convincing enough, here's some more statistics for you. The infant mortality rate, children who are born but die before the age of 5, was 46.3% around 1800. So a child born then had roughly a coin toss chance of making it to their 5th birthday. Between 2015 and 2020, the infant mortality rate was 0.7%. I'm not going to pretend that vaccines were the only reason for that change. Better medicine, diagnoses, and treatment, increased standards of living and nutrition, and laws protecting children also led to fewer babies dying. I will note that infant mortality rates are disproportionately high in places with lower vaccination rates, but because of additional factors at play, I won't give all the credit to vaccines. But they are a huge factor. Fewer children dying sounds like a good enough motivation to vaccinate your kids and yourself. And that's not even touching on all the immunocompromised adults who would also die from these diseases. Though the controversial take of let's not let people die from things we could easily prevent is growing less popular with some elected officials because it's been labeled as socialist. Back to the graph. Notice there are 2 upward spikes in an otherwise downward slope. The first was in the 1870s, a result of the 4th cholera pandemic, smallpox outbreaks, and yellow fever. The second spike was in the late 1910s due to the Spanish flu pandemic, which is commonly referenced as a comparison to the current COVID-19 pandemic, especially considering the news adverts begging people to wear their masks, and the family portraits including a cat wearing a mask. I mean, is that not the cutest little thing or what? Each time there was a sudden increase in baby deaths, it was due to an infectious disease. Thankfully, the diseases causing those spikes are now preventable through vaccines, and that horrifying nightmare of Oscar the Grouch post-ice skating accident will never have the chance to attack my immune system ever again. I really hope we don't see a third spike due to COVID-19. But the most recent data I could find was published in September 2019, before the pandemic reached the US. I do know that the virus causing the Spanish flu wasn't identified until the 1930s. For years, scientists thought bacteria was the cause, and vaccine manufacturers were just guessing, mainly trying to protect people from secondary infection. This time, with current medical technology and a huge amount of global cooperation, the COVID-19 virus was identified almost immediately. Clinical trials have demonstrated multiple effective vaccines, and only vaccine production and distribution stand between us and the outside world. Which is probably going to take a while, considering the United States didn't have a solid distribution plan until Biden and the former administration didn't communicate to the current administration ahead of time, and people still refuse to put a piece of cloth over their face because they would rather shout freedom like petulant children than do a very, very easy thing to help keep themselves and the rest of us safe. I swear, if I have to watch another Karen complain about her rights being violated by being denied entry into a Trader Joe's for not wearing a mask, I am going to lose it. My wife and I already postponed our wedding by a year, and if we have to push it back again, I will lose my last shred of sanity because—
Astra, calm down. Here's your emotional support puppy.
Why does that dog look like my sweet little Cece?
That's not important right now.
The point is, vaccines are important to getting us out of this pandemic and back to normal. Well, hopefully not normal, because this pandemic only really highlighted the failings of a country dedicated to capitalism and individualism over empathy and community. The reason why we don't have to worry about the measles anymore is because we have over 95% of the population immune to it through vaccines. So why does the anti-vax movement exist if vaccines are the key to eradicating horrifying and deadly diseases? A lot of it has to do with misinformation and forgetting how horrifying diseases were before we eradicated them. And if you've ever looked into the anti-vax movement, you've probably heard about the debunked study that linked vaccines to autism. Not the part where it was exposed to be deeply flawed, unethical, and disproven by countless subsequent studies. And probably not the part where autism activist groups challenged the study's premise by asking, why is having autism worse than having your child die? Or maybe you're one of those people who want to know everything that goes into your body and wants to avoid all chemicals. Then you should be scared by a chart like this. How many of these words do you recognize? How many of these chemicals would you want in your body? Considering they're all the polyphonetic concentrations of an apple, popularized by the meme on Reddit, I would say all of them. Everything is made of chemicals. So saying you wouldn't eat an apple based on looking at the chemical breakdown of it is silly. Especially if you're a recently divorced middle-aged dog mom who doesn't have a science background that would allow you to understand what these chemicals are. Sharon. So yes, let's all laugh at silly anti-vaxxers who think they know better than the experts. The problem with that is the anti-vax movement is based on a long history of medical discrimination against women, Black and Indigenous people of color, and LGBTQIA+ individuals. I couldn't make this video in good faith without acknowledging that vaccines, doctors, and medicine have a fraught history. However, we won't get into the gory details of the incredibly unethical medical practices before recent government regulations, especially here in the United States. We have many reliable sources linked in the comments, mainly because our team is coming from a place of privilege, so we don't want to center our own voices. Either way, consider this a trigger warning for discussions of racism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, and medical discrimination. Click the timestamp in the description to skip this section and keep yourself safe. Here's a bit of the history of systemic racism in the medical field. Udodiri R. Okwandu's full lecture will be linked down below. She's a doctoral candidate at Harvard studying medical discrimination and systemic racism.
Medical racism can be viewed as a consequence of scientific racism and refers to prejudice and discrimination in medicine and the healthcare system based upon individuals' race. In the 19th century, a physician argues that enslaved Africans who attempt to run away are suffering from a mental illness. While during this period, anesthesia was experimental, Physicians were increasingly using it during surgical operations. Sims, however, did not. His resistance to anesthesia was not due to speculation of its effectiveness, but instead was rooted in his racist belief that Black people did not feel pain. Thus, slave women such as Anarcha, who was subjected to over 30 experimental operations over the course of 4 years, was subject to incredible pain and suffering in order for Sims to perfect his technique. In 1932, the United States Public Health Service began a study to record the natural history of untreated syphilis in Black men in Macon County, Alabama. Rather than telling them the true purpose of the study, participants were told that they were being treated for bad blood. Researchers took advantage of the fact that the population they were recruiting, impoverished African American sharecroppers, had limited to no access to healthcare and resources. One would think that the emergence of a cure for syphilis would conclude the study. It did not. The Tuskegee scientists continued the study without treating the patients with penicillin and withheld information about a cure from them. In the 20th century, thousands of economically disadvantaged and overwhelmingly Black women are coerced by federally funded health centers into getting sterilized. Among the worst cases of forced sterilization took place in North Carolina at the hands of the state's official eugenics board, which was active from 1929 to 1974 and sterilized 7,600 people during that time period. The board's targets were disproportionately Black and female and almost always poor. During the 1960s, 60% of Black female residents were sterilized at Sunflower City Hospital without their permission. At the turn of the 21st century, the US government considers funding a research project that suggests that primarily Black and brown urban youth are genetically predisposed to acts of violence. Attempts by the scientific and medical community to categorize civil rights protests as signs of a neurological disorder. The legacy of scientific and medical racism continues to work insidiously today, resulting in persistent racial biases in medical practice and scientific investigations. Black mothers are 4 times more likely to die from childbirth than white women, even when socioeconomic status, education, and other factors are matched, because their physical complaints and concerns during pregnancy are largely ignored.
Systemic sexism in medicine means that textbooks, drugs, procedures, and diagnostic guidelines are written around men, specifically white cis men. And that's including a study on ovarian cancer treatments that were exclusively tested on white cis men. Speaking of which, homophobia and transphobia at all levels of healthcare professionals, health insurance companies, and government prevents queer people from receiving the healthcare they need. There are real medical professionals who hide behind religious freedoms to refuse healthcare to the LGBTQ+ communities. Many insurance companies view gender-affirming surgeries as elective. Here are some clips of some LGBTQIA+ people speaking on their current experiences in the medical system. Again, the full videos will be linked down below with more in-depth sources.
Yeah, I don't think I know any trans person that went through the medical system and had a nice time with it.
The doctors who treated me wanted to treat me as if I was a cisgendered woman who wanted to have kids, and didn't really take into account that that's not necessarily the way I identified or what I wanted.
I was seeing a specialist for a different medical problem, and my records and everything all said female. I have everything changed. And the guy looked at it, he went through all of those steps, and then said, "So, do you dress full-time as a woman?"
I went to the urgent care, and the physician on staff that I was dealing with kept telling me over and over how atypical it was for a man to be having a series of urinary tract infections. I tried to interrupt him and say, "I understand, you know, I've been through a gender transition, so my anatomy is probably not what you expect it to be." And he kept stopping me. He wouldn't let me complete and assuring me that he did understand. And he said, "I think I would like to take a look." So I pulled down my pants, and it wasn't at all what he expected.
Even just within the check-in process, I was misgendered. I finally spoke to the doctor, and he came in and was speaking to me as if I was a 13-year-old girl. And all of my symptoms were surrounding hormones. And when I started talking about hormones, this doctor in the hospital actually looked at me and said, "Oh, what do hormones do?" I didn't think hormones did anything. Fast forward 3 days later from this hospital visit, and I was diagnosed with invasive hormonal breast cancer that tested 99% positive for estrogen.
I ended up in an adult psychiatric ward where the doctors all refused to acknowledge me as trans and used the wrong pronouns, like deliberately.
I initially knew I identified and felt female around 5 years old. My family member, who was the director of mental health for the state that I lived in, essentially required forced correction, invasive hypnotherapy, corrective assignment, and orientation to gender roles. If I had to be this way, I'm going to walk in front of a car and I'm going to reset it and try over. That's what I thought when I was 6.
During my first pap smear, in the middle of it, started asking me questions about my sexuality and then giving me quite a lecture about morals and about what was right and wrong to do with sex and about letting down my parents, all in the middle of the procedure.
I've never had a good experience in healthcare.
It made me feel like I couldn't trust doctors.
Plus, because of our for-profit medical system, there's a lot of classism involved too. 2/3 of bankruptcies in the United States are due to medical debt. Because of how insurance is often tied to employment, that meant the people of the United States who lost their jobs due to the deadly global pandemic also lost their health insurance. Many have to go to fundraising sites like GoFundMe to receive financial support for life-threatening illnesses or just basic health care. People in multiple minority groups face even worse barriers to proper care due to intersecting forms of systemic discrimination. I'm not an expert here, and other people have covered this issue way better than I could, so I've linked a few reliable sources in the description which provide more details of the truly horrific history and current state of US medicine. I encourage you to go beyond those sources as well. Suffice to say that distrust of medical professionals among Black, poor, female, queer, and other minority communities is common and understandable, given both history and current events. I'm not going to just say trust science or trust doctors, because trust should be earned. And frankly, a lot needs to change in the American healthcare system before we reach that point. One thing's for sure. I think we can all agree that
this is the bad place.
So now that the heavy and important lesson on medical discrimination is done, how can we tell people to get vaccines when there's so much historical evidence that shows doctors and the government can't always be trusted? Good news. Regulations have helped eliminate unethical testing practices and dangerous chemicals. Cocaine is no longer prescribed for depression. Sorry, Freud. In order to get out of the never-ending cycle of closures, missed family gatherings, and Zoom calls, we need to all get vaccinated if we can. There's a lot of nervousness, even outside of the anti-vax community, regarding the COVID-19 vaccine. It was developed very quickly, so naturally we're all a bit skeptical. There are a lot of situations where I would say finishing fast is a bad thing and leads to an unsatisfying and disappointing end. However, no meaningful shortcuts were taken with the COVID vaccine's development. So let's do a deep dive into how the vaccine was developed and made. Don't worry, Sharon. I'll take the process explanation nice and slow. Step 1 is the exploratory phase. We need to know how the virus works in order to teach our bodies how to kill it. So we needed the virus's DNA. The WHO tweeted that it received the full genetic sequence of the virus from China on January 11th, 2020. That's crazy fast. While vaccines in the past took a lot longer to develop due to technological limitations, that doesn't mean these new vaccines were rushed. We just have much better tools to sequence DNA and communicate with the world almost instantaneously with the internet. Once the WHO received the full genetic sequence, researchers had to figure out what the best approach was to translating this blueprint and weaponize it against the virus. How do we train our immune system to kill this thing on sight? On February 11th and 12th, the WHO held an international forum of experts to determine the best response to the virus, including vaccine development, and released a research roadmap on March 6th. There were a lot of factors to consider when deciding the best way to fight the virus, including how infectious it is, how deadly the symptoms are, and how quickly they develop, how it spreads and infects people, etc. If you've played Plague Inc., you know the drill. Finally, scientists conduct laboratory research to test their idea for a vaccine candidate, sometimes testing on animals. Yes, testing on animals is generally frowned upon, but there are regulations in place that make it less unethical than previous decades. Plus, many infectious diseases are transmitted to humans by animals like bats, due to the destruction of their ecosystems, forcing them to interact with humans more. So maybe we should look into more eco-friendly ways of living on the planet that would prevent viruses in the first place, and therefore eliminate the necessity of animal testing in this case. Food for thought. Actually, animals that have been tested on should not be ingested, so animal test subjects for thought? Once scientists determine it might be feasible to develop a vaccine candidate, research moves forward. On April 13th, 2020, the WHO published a statement co-signed by 130 scientists, funders, and manufacturers around the globe committed to working with the WHO and sharing information to speed vaccine development. The spread of communication and ease of collaboration in an era of the internet is a major factor in how quickly things got done. Back with the Spanish flu, the tools of communication and the methods of the medical field were far less sophisticated, which is why it took so many years to identify the virus and develop a vaccine. Even looking back to polio, the process was a lot longer than the COVID vaccine. Not because that's just how long it takes, but because of the limitations of communication and medical knowledge. So now that we all agree with the game plan, how did we get from we know how this works to we have a vaccine that eradicated this painful and horrifying disease? Next comes the preclinical phase. Companies and scientists do more laboratory research and testing on animals to gather data on how the vaccine works and determine whether it's likely to be safe and effective on humans. So, after the preclinical phase is, say it with me, the clinical phase. Yes, correct. I'm so glad you could get on board with the Dora the Explorer moment. If you didn't say clinical phase, well, go back to your middle school prefix and suffix cards. The researchers and companies submit forms to the FDA that say, hey, we want to develop a new drug that will help people. Let us do the thing. And the FDA looks at their science to make sure that they're legit. They make sure that the data was collected using good lab practices, the manufacturing equipment is effective, and the product is safe to test on humans. Once the scientists at the FDA decide they're legit, they give them the go-ahead to actually develop the vaccine. Now that the FDA has decided that the company and the potential vaccine are legit, we move to phase 1. Small groups of people, usually 20 to 100 volunteers who have never been infected and are otherwise healthy, receive the trial vaccine to double-check that it's safe. Let me make this very clear. Scientists are almost positive the vaccine is safe for humans in this phase. They're not cackling in the corner, watching the test subjects foam at the mouth and drop dead. This phase is mainly to learn about potential negative side effects and a little to learn about immune responses in patients. So this is where we learn that your arm is going to be super sore after the first dose, and the second dose makes your arm even more sore. And just like the flu vaccine, you may feel a little under the weather or run down the next few days. Isn't that thrilling? When it comes to side effects of the vaccines, scientists really cover their bases. That's why most medicines have long lists of potential side effects. Not because they're guaranteed to happen, but because they can't say for certain that they aren't. Here's a list of possible side effects from WebMD. Upset stomach, nausea, vomiting, headache, diarrhea, constipation, dizziness, or drowsiness may occur. If any of these effects persist or worsen, tell your doctor or pharmacist promptly. This medication may raise your blood pressure. Check your blood pressure regularly and tell your doctor if the results are high. Tell your doctor right away if you have any serious side effects, including easy bruising or bleeding, hearing changes such as ringing in the ears, mental or mood changes, unexplained stiff neck, signs of kidney problems such as change in the amount of urine, vision changes, symptoms of heart failure such as swelling ankles or feet, unusual tiredness, unusual or sudden weight gain. I'm not risking vaccination if all those could happen to me. Oh, I should mention that this is for ibuprofen, not the COVID-19 vaccines. You know, Advil. The thing you take for a hangover if you can't take aspirin or just continue drinking. While most people who take ibuprofen for a headache won't experience symptoms of heart failure and liver damage, scientists have to disclose this information, even if it is very low probability you'll experience the symptoms. Next comes phase 2. It's like phase 1, but bigger and more detailed. Clinical study is expanded, and the vaccine is given to people who have characteristics such as age and physical health that are similar to those for whom the new vaccine is intended. Gone are the days of only using healthy cis-straight white men before vaccine approval. Various dosages are tested on hundreds of people with varying health statuses and from different demographic groups in randomized controlled studies. This part answers very important questions like, how will this impact elderly patients who have the highest risk because of the high mortality rate? And how does the vaccine interact with other medical conditions and medications? Ideally, you want to have a vaccine that is effective for the majority of the population, which includes a lot of people with pre-existing conditions. Insurance companies in the US would like to exclude those individuals, usually because they're bad for profit, but scientists in these studies actually care about human life. These studies provide additional safety information on common short-term side effects and risks, examine the relationship between the dose administration and the immune response, and provide initial information regarding the effectiveness of the vaccine in its ability to generate an immune response. These studies also include a control group of people who may receive an already FDA-approved vaccine, a placebo, or another substance. This is usually in what's called a single-blind or double-blind experiment. A single-blind experiment is what happens when you ask your friend to dose you because you're really skeptical about this special genius-stimulating edible. Your friend knows which edible they're giving you, but you don't know, and it could be a different edible or an edible that doesn't have any weed in it, which is the placebo. Sometimes the belief that something will work a certain way alters the reported results. Your mind is a powerful thing. While you can't just wake up and choose to not be depressed, Eris has tried many a time and can confirm it doesn't work. Sometimes having a placebo will still make a difference because you believe it will. So, to prevent this impacting the results, sometimes your scientist friend won't tell you what kind of edible you got dosed with, or if you just got the placebo. All you know is that you either feel smarter or you don't. A double-blind experiment is where neither you nor your friend know what edible you're taking. This helps to eliminate bias in your friend's observations, as well as your own biases. You find out at the end which one you took because a third friend helped you out by putting everything in identical bottles with a sticker at the bottom to mark which is which, that neither of you see until after the experiment. All of that was hypothetical, for legal reasons. However, even if it wasn't, Eris is in Illinois and I'm in Oregon, so it's fine. People receiving the new vaccine under study are compared to people in the control group, which are the ones with the placebo. The control group is super important because they show what happens when you don't have the variable, which is the vaccine, so you have a baseline to compare the vaccine group to. This is scientific method 101. Phases 1 and 2 were completed by Moderna on July 14th, 2020, and August 12th for Pfizer. This means that they had a pretty solid idea of what the side effects are, that the vaccine actually stimulates an immune response, and what dose is needed to do so. Guess what comes after phase 2? Phase, say it with me. Come on, this has to be easier than the first one. 3! Why didn't you say 3? You learn how to count to 3 in preschool. Never mind. Phase 3 is the final and longest step before a vaccine gets ready to be approved and distributed. It's like phase 2, but a lot bigger. This time, thousands of people from various different groups are given the vaccine. This includes people of different genders, ages, ethnicities, geographic regions, class, with or without disabilities or pre-existing conditions, etc. This is because all of these different factors play into how likely a person is going to contract COVID and how it will impact them. So again, you want the vaccine to work on as many people as possible. A young black woman living in the city is going to have a different experience than an older white man from the suburbs, and they'll both have a different experience from an indigenous teen living on a reservation. They have different infection rates due to the areas they live in, and they have different levels of access to quality medical care. So how do you make sure your vaccine works without purposely injecting people with the disease. That might have worked before, but now the law says you can't do something so morally bankrupt, even for what you think is the greater good. The key is volunteers and consent. You have a bunch of people sign up to be tested on. You pick as much of a diverse, randomized group as possible because that's good science and good statistics. Then, you tell them they will receive either a placebo or the vaccine, but they won't know which, and neither will the doctors running the experiment. You give them their injections and release them into the wild to do whatever their lives entail, while regularly testing them for COVID. Maybe one of them goes back to their job at the grocery store. Maybe one goes to a cyberpunk goth rave meetup under a bridge. Maybe one makes science videos while working remotely in rural Oregon. Whatever they do, what's most important is that by letting them live their lives as usual and testing them frequently, scientists can compare the rate of infection in the placebo group to the rate of infection in the vaccinated group. And you need a large enough number of trial participants to get the disease before you know anything useful, because you need to know that fewer vaccinated people getting COVID isn't due to random chance. Ironically, efforts to flatten the curve actually slow down vaccine testing. Let me be clear, flattening the curve was great, because fewer people were being infected, fewer people were dying, and medical workers weren't nearly as slammed with COVID patients. Mask wearing, social distancing, and staying at home saved lives. It just meant that the vaccine development was slightly slower because they had to wait longer for enough people to be infected. From July 27th through November 15th, Pfizer conducted its phase 3 study on 43,661 individuals around the globe, including participants from a racially diverse background and across all age groups. Half of them got the vaccine, and the other half got a placebo. The only major side effects observed were headaches in 2% of the vaccine recipients and fatigue in 3.8%, usually resolving quickly. Of the 43,000 plus volunteers, 170 got COVID-19. Of those 170 cases, 162 were in the placebo group, and only 8 were vaccinated. Of the 10 severe cases, only 1 was in the vaccine group. That translates into an overall effectiveness of 95%, since we assume in a randomized trial this size, there were about the same number of exposure events in the placebo and the vaccine groups. The efficacy was consistent across age, gender, race, and ethnicity demographics, and the observed efficacy in adults over 65 years of age was over 94%. That's how we know it works. And don't worry, the placebo recipients over 16 are now at the top of the list for receiving the vaccine, and many have already gotten their second shot. The Moderna vaccines trial had 30,420 participants, and 196 of them got COVID symptoms. Of those, 185 were in the placebo group, and only 11 had received the vaccine. Furthermore, there were no severe COVID cases in the vaccine group, but 30 severe cases in the placebo group and 1 death from the disease. That's a 94.4% effectiveness rate and a 100% effectiveness rate in reducing the worst outcomes. Moderna's trial group also showed similar efficacy across race and gender, using 99 trial groups across the United States. But wait, only 170 or 196 got COVID? How does that make sense for this experiment? Shouldn't more people have been infected? Remember, these thousands of people were living their lives as they usually were, instead of the unethical alternative of infecting these people purposely. This means these test subjects were probably wearing masks and socially distancing in their day-to-day lives, because, that's what you need to do to reduce your risk of getting COVID. Those goth kids had their rave outdoors and were all 6 feet apart, thus reducing their risk of exposure over someone without a mask in a packed bar in Wisconsin. The experiment was also only testing over a 4-month time period. If the experiment had continued longer, there likely would have been more exposures. What's most important is that enough people got infected to definitively be able to tell that the vaccines work. Now that we know both that the vaccines work and their most frequent side effects, it's time for the final step before approval: the sweet thrill of administrative paperwork and federal inspection. During phase 3 clinical trials, there's an inspection of the manufacturing facility. Experienced FDA investigators carefully evaluate the facility where the vaccine is made and how they make it for compliance with FDA regulations, which are, and I cannot stress this enough, incredibly strict for the safety of everyone. The candidate vaccine for the phase 3 studies is made in batches or lots, which helps the manufacturers ramp up for commercial scale production. The FDA examines vaccine manufacturers' data on manufacturing processes, facilities, product characterization, and demonstration of lot-to-lot consistency. And these are like Gordon Ramsay levels of quality control. The vaccine will not be sent out if it's served on a cold plate without the lamb sauce.
Where's the lamb sauce?
The FDA and manufacturer work together to develop a template of tests to be conducted on the vaccine that will be used for each lot of the vaccine post-approval. If they don't pass these tests consistently, the vaccine doesn't gain approval. After manufacturing review and clinical development programs have both been successfully completed, companies submit a Biologics License Application, or BLA, to the FDA, including preclinical and clinical data and information, as well as details of the manufacturing process and facilities. This application shows proof that they can consistently produce vaccines that are safe, effective, and always have the lamb sauce.
Where's the lamb sauce?
The Pfizer vaccine BLA was accepted for priority review on December 6th, 2020. Let's put out a hypothetical situation here. Say there's a global pandemic of a new, highly infectious disease. Sometimes you know you have it, sometimes you're asymptomatic. It's so deadly that freezer trucks are being used as makeshift morgues behind hospitals. Nurses and doctors and hospital staff can't keep up because of how many people are dying. Sure, you can tell people to stay home to slow the spread or always wear a mask to keep others safe in case you have it. But you happen to live in a country consumed by out-of-control individualism and ignorance, where people would rather kill others by spreading a disease than put pieces of fabric over their mouths and nose because freedom! It's a public health emergency that's being made worse by people crying that their freedoms are being taken away because they can't have their Sunday brunch. And not to mention the fact that local and federal governments aren't providing aid to people, so essential workers living paycheck to paycheck are stuck in this awful purgatory of, do I go to work and potentially get a deadly disease, or do I stay at home and starve to death slowly in my apartment, which is freezing because I can't afford heat? What do you do when something becomes a global pandemic, killing hundreds of thousands of people because of entitled Karens and Brads, and a failure of government to protect people? You get an Emergency Use Authorization, or EUA, for a vaccine. That's where we are with the Pfizer, Moderna, and most recently Johnson & Johnson vaccines, as of recording. The Pfizer vaccine's EUA was issued on December 11th, 2020, and the Moderna vaccine's EUA was approved a week later on the 18th. No vaccine has yet received FDA approval. This means that the final administrative paperwork for the final approval doesn't need to happen in order for the vaccine to be produced and distributed. Let me stress this. It does not mean that the vaccines were rushed or that they didn't pass their safety check and therefore are unsafe. All of those testing phases and manufacturer inspections we went through earlier have already happened. It means instead of having 10 meetings and hearings and more paperwork, you can just get the life-saving vaccine out. Because having those meetings and paperwork and delaying the process means people die. You could be a Vogon about it, but that means your grandmother gets eaten by the ravenous bug bladder beast of Traal.
They wouldn't even lift a finger to save their own grandmothers from the ravenous bug bladder beast of Traal, without orders, signed in triplicate, sent in, sent back, queried, lost, found, subjected to public inquiry, lost again, and finally buried in soft peat for 3 months and recycled as firelighters.
Bureaucracy is necessary, but we have to make some exceptions in emergencies to save lives. The final step of the approval process is the presentation of findings to the FDA's Vaccine and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee, or BLA review. That's Vogon for, we have a bunch of smart people review all the evidence to see if it all checks out. After reviewing all the data from previous steps, the FDA decides whether to approve the vaccine. A typical FDA team includes physicians, chemists, statisticians, pharmacologists, toxicologists, microbiologists, experts in post-marketing safety, clinical study and site inspectors, manufacturing and facility inspectors, and labeling and communications experts. The FDA also sometimes seeks the input of its Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee, the VRBPAC, a panel of outside independent technical experts from various scientific and public health disciplines. If everything checks out, you have the correct prisoner release forms with the proper signatures, and you make sure everything is in the blue form because you have the president of the galaxy with you, so it can't be on the white form. It gets approval, and the company can market and sell the vaccine in the United States. Go Cats! All right, you've survived the process, and now the vaccine is approved and ready to rumble. Cue the satisfying how it's made montage and pack it up. But you're not done with the FDA yet. Welcome to Phase 4, post-approval. Formal, ongoing studies are conducted after the vaccine is approved and licensed. These ongoing studies look for things like additional side effects, especially long-term ones, how long immunity tends to last once a person's vaccinated, etc. The FDA continues overseeing production, monitoring the vaccine and production activities, including facility inspections, as long as the manufacturer holds a license for the vaccine. The Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, VAERS, co-sponsored by the FDA and CDC, tracks all reports of side effects. The FDA can require a manufacturer submit the results of their own tests for potency, safety, and purity for each vaccine lot. The FDA can even require each manufacturer to submit samples of each vaccine lot for testing. Gordon Ramsay may not be in the kitchen, but you better believe he will stop by to make sure you have the lamb sauce. The Pfizer and Moderna COVID-19 vaccines have been shown to be most effective with multiple doses. In the case of these vaccines, a single dose doesn't provide as many people with immunity. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine only requires one dose and is 68% effective. Why do some vaccines require multiple doses? Everyone is different. Say a clinical study showed that after one dose, 80% of people's immune systems had learned to protect them. But after 2 doses, 95% of people had immune systems ready to fight off the disease. Testing all people who received the vaccines to find the 20% who didn't get immunity after the first dose is expensive and difficult. So it's way easier and cheaper to just give everyone 2 shots. The 5% of people left without immunity are protected by herd immunity, or community immunity. Enough people are immune so the virus can't spread to them. This is particularly important for the safety of infants and immunocompromised individuals who can't get the vaccine. It also protects the people who can't get the vaccine due to allergies. You might be able to survive COVID, but not everyone can. And no, we are not going to argue that this is just natural selection, because that is an unempathetic, monstrous idea and a slippery slope to eugenics, which is some Nazi-level stuff. We're not going to go in depth into that in this video because Abby Thorne of Philosophy Tube explains it more in depth and much better than we can. You can find links in the description and citation document. Sometimes, immunity from a vaccination wears off after a while. This is where booster shots or additional doses months or years later come in. Everyone's immune system is different, but if enough people lose the immunity after a certain amount of time, it's safer, cheaper, and easier to give everyone the booster shot than to test everyone for lost immunity. Speaking of lost immunity, if you already had COVID-19, you do still need to get the vaccine. Reinfection or getting COVID-19 again is possible. At time of recording, experts don't yet know how long someone's immune system protects them from getting sick again after recovering from COVID-19. The immunity someone gains from having the infection, called natural immunity, varies from person to person. Early evidence suggests that natural immunity from COVID-19 may not last very long. We also don't yet know how long immunity produced by vaccination lasts. Again, this is a public health emergency, and there's an emergency use authorization. So although the data shows that the vaccine is safe and effective in the short term, we don't have long-term results yet. And no, Bill Gates isn't going to microchip you with the vaccine. You already have a tracking device that knows where you are at any moment and is constantly collecting data on you. It's called a cell phone. It knows that you've been very lonely and miss me, Sharon. That's why you keep getting recommended Adam and Eve and Kinky Wish ads. Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and Apple already have all of your personal data that they sell to companies to boost revenue. You cannot hide from the tech giants. The accelerated timeline of the COVID-19 vaccine's development was due to the US and international governments bringing together government agencies, academia, nonprofit organizations, and pharmaceutical companies to develop a coordinated strategy for prioritizing and speeding development of the most promising treatments and vaccines. Governments also provided funding for vaccine development and manufacturing, encouraging companies to aggressively pursue vaccines due to the lowered financial cost. Moderna used US government funding, and Pfizer used similar funding from Germany. If you don't trust German engineering, then what can you trust? The FDA and WHO also provide the disease information they can to pharmaceutical companies to speed the exploratory stage along. In addition, some of the preclinical steps can be abbreviated if the FDA deems the developer's data sufficient to begin trials. These shortcuts were more about dramatically improving communication and speeding up paperwork than skipping steps, which can only happen with a lot of attention being paid on the specific vaccine's development. Luckily, COVID-19 had our attention. These vaccines aren't scary. COVID-19 should terrify you. You may survive getting COVID, but your grandmother you visited over the holidays? She might not. The immunocompromised person in the produce section might not survive. Your precious little golden doodle Cece? She can get COVID. Cases have been observed in dogs and cats because of close contact with someone who had COVID. Getting a vaccine, like wearing a mask, isn't just for you. It's for everyone. Herd immunity, or community immunity, which the CDC is trying to make happen, is when enough people are vaccinated or otherwise immune from the disease so it cannot spread. Community immunity may be the Comic Sans of phrases, but it's necessary to protect the most vulnerable people who cannot receive the vaccine for medical reasons, mostly young children. Community immunity, which is actually growing on me now a little, I'll admit, is all of us protecting each other. I'll be getting vaccinated for myself, sure, but also for my grandmother and my friends, and all the guests I'll be invited to my wedding, which was postponed, but is still definitely happening because we already put down deposits on everything and bought dresses, and I really need something to look forward to because although my wife is incredible, I do miss my family and our friends so, so much. And if you want to have brunch with your friends and see your relatives or go see a play or anything that involves being around another person without fear, you'll get vaccinated too. You want what's best for your little golden doodle. She's adorable, and she's the only company you have right now. There's a long history of why you shouldn't trust doctors and scientists because of the unethical practices of the past and some of the present. However, when you buy into the lie that vaccines are dangerous, you're putting lives at risk. Well, I don't want anyone to die. Then you need to get vaccinated. Sure, you might not get sick. Sure, you might not get anyone else sick if you do. But is that really a risk you want to take with the lives of children or immunocompromised people that have families who care about them deeply? We live in a society and we're social animals. We're going to be around each other and interact with each other every day. So we need to do our part to take care of each other. And if that means my arm is sore for 2 days and I feel a little sick afterwards, I'll do it. At the end of the day, wearing a mask and getting vaccinated shows that you care about other people. I'm still scared, Astra. With everything that's happened since the election, I'm afraid. So am I. I'm not saying to not be afraid.
I'm saying you should do the scary thing that will save lives in the end. And there are plenty of videos of people getting the vaccine, showing you start to finish, and telling you the details of their experience all online. And if you decide to do your own research to make yourself feel better, please, please make sure they're from reputable, trusted sources and not from biased amateurs in your Golden Doodle Moms Against Vaccines Facebook group. Treat anti-vaxxers with compassion, because distrust of doctors and scientists among marginalized groups has a long history behind it. And there is an entire industry dedicated to manipulating and exploiting people who have been historically mistreated by medicine. They functionally went from one abusive relationship to another. Calling them stupid for distrusting doctors is gaslighting. Mocking them for being sucked into conspiracy theories is victim blaming. That said, refusing to vaccinate your children endangers their lives and the lives of immunocompromised and younger children. The anti-vax movement has led to a resurgence of diseases which were effectively eliminated, and thousands of children have died unnecessarily. The people leading the anti-vax movement have profited off the deaths of children and are abusive monsters. The people following this movement are endangering their children in the same way a parent who stays with an abusive spouse is endangering their children. Except it's not just their own children. It's the child in class on immunosuppressants who can't be vaccinated. It's the younger child who hasn't gotten her vaccines yet. It's the adult teacher whose vaccination has worn off and relies on herd immunity. It's not a decision you make for your family. It's a decision that affects everyone. Choosing not to vaccinate could turn out fine, but it's a gamble with children's lives.
Knowing the details does help a little bit, but another session with you would be great for my nerves.
Not until you get vaccinated. I'm not risking getting my loved ones sick for a little bit of action.
That is some pretty solid motivation.
If I had known that would be the thing to get to you, this video would have been a lot shorter.
I'm a simple woman with simple needs. But seriously, I will call you the minute I get both my vaccine doses. And then you can do that thing with the splits and the chain.
And that's all the time we have for today. Remember to wear a mask and get a vaccination when you can, because it's the right thing to do. Now, I have a wife and a golden doodle to get back to. Astra out.
So much for joining us here on Bad Astra. If you enjoyed watching, please like this video, leave a comment telling us what topic you'd like to see next month, and share it with everyone you know. Be sure to also subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. And if you can't get enough of me, Eris, and Science Tommy, join our Patreon, where we post behind the scenes, deep dives, and other fun content. A special thank you to all of our Patreon supporters who make these videos possible. Astra out.